All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of episode 3, actually, of the Rare Groove Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Earl Holder, aka DJ Solero, and I'm here with Grammy-nominated musician and new age music pioneer, Mr. Steven Halpern. Mr. Halpern, thank you for availing time out of your busy schedule to come on the program.
Absolutely, delighted to be here, and really appreciate your introductory letter. And that was what, as soon as I saw it, I go, this is an interview I am looking forward to. And I don't get to say that often.
Right. Now, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, for starters, how did you get into music?
It got into me. At an early age, I was crawling down the hallway, I'm told by my parents, when we lived in Flushing, New York, in an apartment building, because my parents never played any music. And one of the neighbors down the hall had some music coming out of his closed door, and I'd kind of crawl down and hang out in front of his doorway. And then, as we moved out to Long Island, got into the school band situation, and very quickly got very good on trumpet, but also got very bored playing Little Black Notes written by dead white European composers. So I was turned on to jazz and improvisation. And the first time I ever was next to someone who was improvising in the first rehearsal of concert band in high school, and actually it was in junior high school the first time, it was like, how do you guys know what notes to play? Well, you have to learn theory and you do this and then you play what you feel. And I remember saying, no music teacher had ever told me to play music that you feel. I don't feel anything, I'm reading the notes. He said, well, do some research. Find out about the history. And that got me into researching and studying and going through the books and working with teachers and getting good playing the music up to, let's say, 1965. So that was originally Dixieland, and then Al Hirt, and then Dizzy Gillespie and Maynard Ferguson. The other thing that happened for me early on, also in concert band, I was one of the best trumpet players in Long Island. And where were you based?
Long Island.
Where's that?
Long Island.
Oh, okay. So I was in the all-star band, and the first rehearsal, there's a guy, turned out his name was Frank Figuera, playing a glissando starting in the regular range and going all the way up to triple high C, which is Maynard Ferguson territory. And it just blew my mind, because trumpet players, those are not written notes. I went right up to him and said, who are you and how do you learn how to do that? And he told me who he was and told me how he learned, and I learned how to do it and studied with his teacher. And the other thing I got from that is when you are a trumpet player and getting your body into that state to be able to do that, it's a natural high. So as I look back over my life, a lot of my connection with music has been music as a portal to get into an altered state of consciousness naturally, a legal, non-addictive, energy renewing high. And trumpet was my first modality through that. So I'm in high school, I get kicked out of concert band, particularly marching band, for going left when everyone else went right. Was happy to get out of that band, and started, led my own little quartet and quintet in the talent troupe in high school, and was getting some awards and some notoriety for that. Again, playing notes, riffs that we had studied, learning to play stuff that sounded good, but it was all me playing riffs, things I learned with improvisation, but it was all basically left brain learning. Get up to the University of Buffalo and walking around, because my identity at that point was pretty much tied in with being a trumpet player. I'm new at school. How do you meet people? I'm ready for a jam session. There is a concert on Sunday afternoon, about the third week of school, with some of the faculty musicians and an incredible musician who became very famous in certain areas, named Charles Gale. He was like the Buffalo version of John Coltrane. And the Buffalo version of McCoy Tyner, Jack Clark, a professor, was the keyboard player. So we're in the faculty lounge, we're sitting on the floor, a bunch of people in the audience. They play a couple of amazing songs, and Jack stands up from the piano, points at me and says, "Is that a trumpet in your case?" I go, yeah. He says, get on up here. They don't know who I am. And I get up there. And when it's my time to solo, he points at me and I start soloing, playing the hippest runs I know, and going, okay, I'm doing pretty good here, you know, sitting with the faculty and these great jazz guys. And all of a sudden, the trumpet starts playing itself. And I am not thinking anymore. The trumpet was weightless and it fit on my lips. The embouchure, as a trumpet player, you have to get that embouchure just right. It was effortless. It became an extension of my nervous system, but I didn't even know what I was playing. It was just flowing. And at the end, my friends who had known me says, when did you learn how to do that? You didn't do that when you played with us last week. And Jack Clark says, we thought you could do that. And I was invited to be part of their faculty band. I got to play in the after hours parties with the best musicians in Buffalo, and met some of also the leading poets who were in residence that year at the University of Buffalo, and learned about the concept of the ancient Greeks and other cultures of an artist tuning in to his muse. So that became my quest early on. I'm reading about it, that musicians would tune in, whether it's Mozart, who would listen to the music that he heard in his head. And I'm going, okay, I don't hear any music in my head. I would like to. And I started praying and setting up myself on a quest. I want to connect with my muse. And that was part of my process slowly over the next several years, until I met some other musicians, one of whom became very famous and was in my band that I started, an 8-piece jazz rock band. His name was Joe Ford. And standing next to Joe on alto sax, myself on trumpet, there was electricity going on, and he would play solos. The first time we met and did a session with the band, I played one of my best solos on Song for My Father, Horace Silver's song. And I thought I did pretty good, a little bit of ego in there. And Joe played my solo back and then played it backwards, forwards, inside out, and faster. And it was like, who is this guy? And I just took him on as my mentor. And the way he would teach us, he would play stuff. I would go home at night, practice for a couple hours, come back the next day for the rehearsal. And if I played his solo back and learned those lessons, he would go, okay, check this out. And that was the beginning for the next 2 years until the Black Studies program started at the University of Buffalo in 1968. This was all happening at the same time. And I was allowed to sit in, since I obviously wasn't part of the Black Studies program, because I was the best trumpet player in town, in the class on improvisation taught by Mr. Ron Carter, jazz great bass player, and got some great instruction there, and had one piano lesson as part of the gift for us students, a 15-minute lesson. I got my piano lesson with Joe Chambers, known as a drummer, but a great piano player. And I went in there saying, I want to learn to play like McCoy Tyner and Alice Coltrane. When I didn't understand what she was doing with all those modes and scales, they weren't regular scales that I had ever studied. And I remember he said, wow, she's just playing these modes. And he showed me the modes and showed me some of the fingers. And it was like a portal to another level of improvisation. And suddenly I was able to play that kind of music without taking years of piano lessons, would hang out at the piano and start doing that. But it was all high energy music. And that was my background. I also was playing guitar. I was playing guitar in R&B bands. Even in high school, we had the best blue-eyed soul singer was one of my best friends. So we had a hot band in high school. He came back from college. We had a band. We were the only 4 white guys at the Apollo Theater many times, catching all the shows with Otis Redding and Sam and Dave and all the greats. So we're learning about energy from that aspect. And after the band, which at that point was called New Chicago Lunch, with Joe Ford and John Weiss and a great singer named Madeline Davis, got a contract. We were being groomed to be the next Blood, Sweat, and Tears. come down to New York to do our recording in late October 1969. And the producer who loved us got taken off the program. We got a new producer that came in, didn't like what we did, and told our band, who the first song we played was one of my tunes. It was da 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 da. We had a great drummer named Virgil Day. He said, no, you guys, your song goes like this. Da 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 da, ba 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 ba. Okay, very slow down. They wanted us to be like Manfred Mann, which was, we found out later, was a heroin-based band, and very slow. And don't tell the best musicians in Buffalo to play someone else's music and not to do our own music. So basically the band broke up that day in the studio. And I had now 2 weeks free before I had to go back to graduate school in Buffalo. And I always wanted to get out to check out the scene in San Francisco. How do I get out there? That night, a friend of my brother's showed up at the house and said, when I mentioned it, they said, I have a half fare card. That was in the days when if you were under 21, you could fly for half fare. So I became Jeffrey Hirsch for a day, showed up at the airport at 8 o'clock in the morning, got on the plane with no ID, back in the day, and showed up in California, knowing one person, having no place to sleep, just was not thinking of a lot of things. And that was the beginning of what I thought was a 2-week visit. Cut to the chase, and the new music, I'm meeting the jazz musicians of Berkeley, including Bert Wilson, some wonderful people, Sonny Simmons, Smiley Winters, the Berkeley jazz scene. They were meeting every day at Bert's house. It was like a master class. And I'm sitting back and then allowed to sit in sometimes, and was good enough to be invited back. So that was suddenly connecting with great musicians, including Mike Nock and the seminal jazz fusion group called The Fourth Way, also with Michael White on violin.
Violin, right.
And because I was playing for free, I was the 5th member of The Fourth Way. And when they got invited to Montreux Jazz Festival in 1970, Mike said, hey, why don't you come with us? And I go, this is my opportunity to get into the international world as the hot new guy from New York. The manager said, the contract says only 4 of you. I said, I'll pay my own way. He said, we don't care, you can't come. And that was the change that really took me out of the jazz world and into going back to graduate school. But before that, while I'm in Berkeley, I was also coming from my studies in Buffalo. I was told about the William Blake Museum at the University of Santa Cruz, which had the original illuminated manuscripts, which are gold embossed by William Blake, the great visionary and poet and artist. And I wanted to see these for real. I was told it was like an acid trip without acid. So since I'm not having the money to get acid or access to that, I'd like to get some, I'd like to have that experience. And I hitchhiked from San Francisco to Santa Cruz. And I got a great hitch from some hippies in a van, and we're talking philosophy and New Age and other spirituality. It says, you don't forget about Blake. We're going to show you a place up in the mountains that you really want to go. It's a Zen center. And they take me an hour outside of their way, drop me off at the side of the road and said, it's around here. And they leave. And I'm in the middle of nowhere, realizing I'm suddenly 2 miles up a country road. This is way before cell phones. I'm in trouble. What do I do? And just then, somebody from the Zen Center, which was no longer a Zen Center, shows up at the 40 mailboxes and says, are you the guy who applied for a position to be a staff member at Bridge Mountain Foundation? I go, no, but if you're offering, I'll take it. Part of the New York humor. He says, great, come back, meet the staff in a couple of hours. You can walk down that road across the main road. There's a redwood amphitheater. There's a redwood, basically there's a meditation area. That was a natural power point for the Native Americans. And I walked down there, and as I'm walking, this is now about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I noticed my fingertips are buzzing. And this is, again, no added vegetable, visionary, anything, not smoking anything. I get down to the clearing. It's beautiful. I've never been around redwoods. And I remember the last thing I remember is I'm looking up and seeing the circle of redwoods. And suddenly I'm in an unexpected deep meditation. And in that meditation, I hear the new music. And I also hear, for one of the very few times in my life, a voice saying, this is the music that you've been searching to hear, whether that was my muse speaking or whatever it was. And your job, the other part of that was, your job is to share this with the world. Now, what I was hearing turned out to be the music, the sound of the Fender Rhodes electric piano. But I had never seen one of them before, so I didn't know what it was. But it was this kind of celestial, tinkly, crystalline sound. And I just knew I felt so much peace, and it felt so wonderful. And I'm going, but what do I do with this? I'm a trumpet player, first of all, and out to the world, I don't know anything about business. I have no money. What are we talking about? But I go back as the sun's going down. I'm supposed to meet the staff for the audition. You know, I have a ticket to leave California in 2 days. So if I don't get it, you know, it's just a free gift. And I go to the wrong building. There's a piano in the big recreation room where the workshops are held. There's no staff member there. I sit down at the piano and I go into trance and I start playing the music that I had heard. But I didn't even know what I was playing until about 10 minutes later, somebody coughs and there's 10 people in the room, the staff, and they said, who is this guy? And someone else says, how'd you learn to play like that? And the other guy says, remember I told you I met somebody up at the mailbox? And someone else says, hire him. I called Buffalo that night, says, I'm not coming back. I gave up my life, my fellowship, my graduate fellowship, all my books, my notebooks, all my clothes, all my LPs, and started life over. And that was the beginning. But I would play this music for people, and ordinarily you play it, and they would say, oh, this music makes us feel so peaceful, it's good for doing yoga or meditation. But because this was like the sister organization of the leading human potential institute, it was related and connected to Esalen Institute. All the major leaders of this new human potential field of inquiry of psychology would come through. So the next week, Dr. John Lilly comes in and the staff says, you got to hear this guy's music. And I played, and he said, yes, great. You know, subjectively, it appears your music is very relaxing and healing. You want to be taken seriously, you need to do research. I just let that slide. 2 weeks later, Dr. Stanley Krippner, another major researcher, is doing a weekend workshop. Same thing. He says, if you want to be taken seriously, if your music really is something different, you need to prove it with biofeedback research. And I go, great, I have no money. I'm here at a room and board, no pay gig. I know nothing about research. What am I supposed to do? So I just became the dean of the first human potential graduate school at Sonoma State College. If you apply, I will guarantee that you get in. We'd love to have someone do research on music and healing. Suddenly, the universe had presented me with a place to do research, a place to go to school. Right after I said to my faculty and friends in Buffalo, you'll never catch me in grad school again. Famous last words, never say never. And I go to school, and part of the centerpiece of the studies and my research was to do research on the healing powers of the new music that I'm doing with both brainwave biofeedback, GSR, galvanic skin response, like lie detectors. And right about that time, one of the other people I connected with, including Dr. Krippner, says, the brand new research modality is Kirlian photography. Create a device that could photograph the aura, the electromagnetic energy field around the body. So even now today, a lot of people don't know about that. But back then, it was like talking Greek. When I'm talking to the media or trying to get some reviews of my first album, they didn't know what to do. In fact, this picture came from the research. This was one of the plants that was part of the research. No plant went to a school went to a store to buy the album. It's one of the problems with the album cover. But we also, of course, worked with people. And we took pictures of fingertips, which are on my website, on my album Spectrum Suite and Chakra Suite. And the results were so extraordinary that one of the scientists said, compared to the classical music, the most relaxing classical music that music therapy had to offer, I blew them out of the water. It was so much more relaxing and healing to the energy field that one of the scientists said, this is no longer just your graduate research project. This is your life. You need to get this out to the world. So this is now March 1973. I still have no money. I now have my own Fender Rhodes piano after selling my second guitar and trumpet in 1970, but I don't know what to do with that. I'm making individual tapes. When I do concerts, people say, oh, we'd love to have a copy of this album, of what you're playing. And I'd make little reel-to-reel and then cassette tapes for them. Very time-consuming. Each was a one-up. And they say, thank you for this gift. And no one would pay for it. And I'm going, I don't even have the money to buy another bunch of tapes. So I knew that that was not the way to go. 1974, Christmas party at the home of the owner of the big music store in Palo Alto that I was a teacher at. That's a gig I could do. I teach most instruments, mostly not keyboard, but trumpet, guitar, saxophone. And John Handy is the leader of the jam session at the house. And I'm sitting in. And after I do a hot solo, a tall guy named David Porter comes up to me and says, wow, you're pretty good. Do you have an album? I go, no, I'd love to have an album. He says, well, I am just opening the first multi-track studio in the Bay Area for independent artists. I go, great. I said, but not only that, I'm the manager of the first record pressing plant in the San Francisco Bay Area for independent artists. So no longer did you have to have a contract with Sony or Warner Brothers or the big labels. You could be an independent artist. And as a guy from New York and basically an indie kind of guy, I said, I'll be your first client. And I was his first client. So I had basically 8 days to get together for my first session. And that first session is what wound up being this, knowing nothing about recording studios per se, nothing about putting an album together, and nothing about all the other things that went into it. But because it was music that I had been playing for years and then organizing as I did on side one with the chakras. So one keynote, so it says keynote C, the color red, and the first chakra, that put an ancient meditative concept into recorded form. And I was the first person to record a chakra balancing album, a concept that at the time, most people, this was before yoga was mainstream, people didn't know what a chakra was. So I had to call it then. There it is. Okay, hopefully it's not distorting on your end, but what I was playing was very ambient, non-melodic, non-rhythmic. But the difference between that and what I was playing in 1970 was that here, was, at least on this album, was the side one was organized according to keynotes. So I play improv in the key of C, improv for 3 minutes in the key of D, improv in the key of E, and these are all major keys, basically based on pentatonic scales. Again, going back to Coltrane and all the music of the 65 to 70 in the new fusion with, and certainly what we learned with Ron Carter, pentatonic scales, where is that? Then you would learn about multimodal masking, and you learn about chromatic alteration and all the other things. But the basic thing was to keep it consonant and keep it non-melodic, because what I discovered is that if there's a melody or a structure that you could pay attention to and predict where the music is going, that changes your brain waves and makes you more dominant in the left hemisphere, the analytic hemisphere, which keeps you out of a meditative and healing state. And I didn't realize how important that was right at the beginning, but very quickly it became clear to me. Now, having recorded side A, which is basically about a half hour, I had a couple other hours that I paid for studio time. So I called up a couple of my friends. I said, hey, could you hurry up down here? I got some free studio time for you. And that's the first two songs on side two. A friend of mine named Yasos, a great other pioneer of New Age music. We had never rehearsed. He comes in, we share a little cannabis, and he said, don't even tell me what key it is. I had recorded one song in advance, and he says, and then we'll do another. Don't even tell me what key, just start playing. And then he played live what you hear. And I'm going, and I'm having a hard time keeping my hands on my keyboard because I am so blown away by what he's playing. So that finishes, and I mix those songs, and I still have some time on Sunday. So I call a drummer that I'd been working in a jazz rock funk band. His name was Otis. And he says, yeah, I'll come in and play. He lived near the studio in San Jose, but only, and this gets to the Holy Grail aspect, but only if you let me phase shift the drums, and then I'll play for free. So I said, sure, anything you want, man, come on down. So with no rehearsal, we do the live tracking, me on bass, him on drums, then he packs up and leaves, and I overdub the guitar, the trumpet, the Rhodes, and that's how that song evolved. And then I was out of time. So there wasn't time to do a lot of tuning of all the instruments. It was a quick tuning because I didn't know I was even going to do it. I brought my instruments in just in case I had extra time, but also because I had no idea I'd ever be in a studio again. What I, discovered right away is I loved being in the studio. I loved the control of all the EQ and all the variations. It became my temple of sound. I was in love immediately. I also loved the fact that in a good studio that's completely soundproofed, it was a natural high. It was, I could meditate so easily in there. It became one of my principles to book, when I booked time in the studios for the next 30 years, to book extra time before we started. I tell the engineer, take a break for 20 minutes. I just want to meditate in here. And they would look at me and say, you're going to pay us to just leave you alone in the room? I go, yeah. And I'd come in, and the first track was spot on. And the room, the reputation started happening early on. We don't know about the guy. He lights a candle, he turns the lights off, but he starts playing, and he doesn't make mistakes. It's one take wonder. It was like the studio guys in LA or New York, but I'm doing it in my own music. And it became my modus operandi for how to get myself in tune, to tune into my muse, to tune into wherever the music is coming from. And there were times when I know I'm playing, and then there are times when I vanish and the music just flows through. And years later, of course, when Keith Jarrett is talking about that, he's talking about he could feel the music coming through his left shoulder. And a lot of musicians would talk about going on automatic. And some of them talk about it openly, some don't. And some, if they have all the ego, says, yeah, man, it's all me. It's all my brilliance. I learned early on that anytime I thought I was getting really hot, that's when I would hit notes that were clearly not the right notes. In the studio, you could erase those, so no one would hear those. A couple of times it would happen in live concerts, and I would get upset about it and go, okay, just get back into the zone. What was interesting is no one in the audience heard them. And I'm going, how could they not hear that? Because I'm a musician. They're in this state. And so one of the things I understood about the music is that it got people into an altered state without them smoking anything, whether they knew anything about music or not, where the left brain, the critic, there are right notes and wrong notes and all that aspect is irrelevant. They get into the zone where now we could call it a mindfulness state, where you are totally at peace, and you're not thinking, you're just being. And that's what happened. Now, the other question I know you're going to ask me, so why did you take that song off? Well,
I was going to ask that question.
Right. Because so I was going to save that for my memoir, but we're gonna let it out there today because your audience wants to know, and I want them to know. I got letters. So my first pressing is 1,000 LPs. I started getting about 30 letters. Let's say 50 letters. 30 of them were, "This is the best music I've ever heard. Thank you so much. We're more relaxed than we've ever been." And the other was, "Will we get that piece of shit on side 2 off of that? We can't get up, with our massage, oily fingers. We can't, turn the turntable off."
There's like, something for everybody, sweet.
Right. You're playing, we're making love, and we have to get up and stop to get rid of that fast song. And then it was the kicker. If you don't get rid of that fast song, we will never buy another album from you again. And I'm thinking, I don't know that I'm maybe even going to do another song, but at an early, phase, I go, I don't want to be pissing people off if they want another slow song. So I'm suddenly out of records, and very quickly, without any preparation, I record something that was then called Rainbow Raga, and that became the replacement for the fast song on side 2. But the clear and true answer was popular demand. One of the several times in my life where, as a guy from New York who gets told you can't do that, my first reaction is, well, who are you to tell me that I can't do this on my album? And then it was, okay, if you want to stay in business and you want to be of service to people, then you need to listen to the feedback you get, not necessarily from the critics or from the guy who wrote on Discog.com. He took the only good song off of his album. And that was it. The other problem with side A is, if you take a look, it's 25 minutes and 25 seconds, okay? That's too long to press an LP. If you look at the LPs in that era, they were 18 minutes, 19 minutes, 17 minutes, some of them were 20. 21 is pushing it. The record pressing plants basically refused to press a 25-minute album. And they said, you need to re-record that, make it shorter. So that's why I had to redo side 1. Nobody even noticed that side 1 was different. The obvious thing was side 2. And that was why the cover, the first version went out of print per se. And then let's see, where did my other, it was here a minute ago. That's why the name changed to become Spectrum Suite, and started off with the entire field with these concentric circles, which came from a movie I had seen. And at a dinner with one of my mentors, I say, I need a new cover for my album. I just repressed it. I need to go to print next week. I don't have a cover image, and I didn't want to pay $500 to have it designed. I didn't have time. And a book falls off the bookshelf at the house where we are, opens to the page with this image. And Dr. J.J. Hertock, who was my teacher at that point, says, that's your cover. And it was a movie that I had seen the week before in LA from an early visual artist named John Whitney, a master in the field. And that became my album. The problem was the original version, I'll get it in a second, maybe, was too black. So the store said, it's too black, too dark. And your music is so light, you need to put a white border on it. And I'm going, you're going to tell me how to do my album? And basically they said, no, but if you don't do it what we want, we're not going to buy it. So again, when the public speaks, also here you could read my name. On the first version.
Yeah, your name's not there.
My name's not there. Store said, we're not going to take it. Who do we return it to if it doesn't sell? I go, well, okay, you need to put your name on it. That's how I learned to do stuff, being told and given the option of go out of business or do like regular people, get your name on it. And the first version of the Spectrum Suite had my name. Let me see if I can just grab one here without knocking everything over.
Yeah.
And I'll show you something else. The first version, I had this all, but things fell down. I actually had a couple other albums. One was this version, which was an intermediate version with the crystalline piano because it was crystalline, but it still did not really get the information across. But people did not like the Total Black album, the one I just showed you. I found this one. I bought that when I was in Mexico, and I said, okay, we'll do a little rainbow, and we'll have that around there. And well, that's weird. It was right here a couple minutes ago. I'll find it. But in any case, if you look at the other album cover, my name is at the very top, and it's invisible. So again, I knew nothing about graphics or the basic things in the business, and learned by the seat of my pants and being told, either fix it or we're not going to carry it in our store. And right before the, oh, here we are. I knew it was just hiding. So here it is. And way up there is my name.
Yeah, I remember that album.
And
but I remember seeing that version.
Right. So this is what, now, about 2 years ago, somebody sent me a photo of Marianne Faithfull, who was hanging out with Mick Jagger at the time, in her living room, and there's a bunch of albums at her feet. This is one of the albums.
Oh, she had it, okay.
So she had it. So it's conceivable that Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull made love to this album. So I wrote her, I tried getting in touch. I don't know if it ever got through to her, through Facebook or whatever, but never got a response. But that was interesting. And then I worked with an artist and came up with this cover, which again had the keynotes related to the colors of the chakras, branding as a keyboard. And this was the cover that most people know Spectrum Suite as. I would always use I pay extra for audiophile vinyl. I did half speed mastering. I did the same. I hired Bernie Grunman to do mastering down in LA at the, the #1 mastering lab in LA. In my world, nobody cared. In the jazz or rock or classical world, Bernie Grunman was magic. In the new age field, nobody cared. But I had great sounding albums. I paid extra money for the pressings. And then one of the pressing companies, right before they refused to press anything else for me, said, we will just demo color records. So I have rainbow colors, and these never went into production, but I have a series of these. Some are blue, some are transparent, some are clear. It was, so these are in my private stash. And
just one question. I just wanted to ask you, like, when you initially put together the Christening For Listening record, because rumor has it that your reasoning for making the record, well, one of them was to grow plants. Is that true?
No. But as I showed you in that in the opening picture, in the research lab in 1973, that we're working with the GSR, the galvanic skin response. There was research that had been done by Cleve Baxter that was featured in a book called The Secret Life of Plants and in the Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain. And Cleve Baxter had discovered the fact that plants communicate with each other, that plants can pick up our own vibes. So he found that out, that when he would clip a leaf, the plants would freak out on the strip chart recorder, the lie detector technology. So then he would even think about that, and the plants would freak out. So we had that technology because scientists I was working with were in touch with Cleve Baxter, and some of them had worked with Dr. Marcel Vogel, who was another leading scientist who did great research, IBM scientist who got into very sophisticated energy field research. And then when we got to Kirlian photography, we said, well, let's do simultaneous Kirlian photography, galvanic skin response, and the plants. And then when the album came out, people would play it and they said, our plants love this music. So it seemed like it was a good idea to have that on the cover, but it sold, a few copies because no plant went to a store to buy the album. And the plant stores going, we're not going to carry a record. Plants need, plant food. We need fertilizer. We're not going to carry a record. When I first took the album to, first of all, record stores, I said, we don't know where to put it. It showed up in Exotic Folklore, if they would even take it. And the first store to take it was Tower Records, bless their heart. Other times I would go to health food stores. They would put it on Edge, so you didn't even know it was an album. I came back a month later in one of the stores in Palo Alto, and they said, you didn't sell any records. I said, well, I just spent a half hour in your store looking for my albums. I can't find them. They were behind the lettuce on the edge, so nobody could find them. And so I started learning about marketing, again, for the fact that you need to be able to see what's going on. I was the first person to offer free demo cassettes, so you could hear samples of the music. But I didn't do it for plants, but we found early on that plants loved it and people loved it. But it's easier to see, and some people send me their photos of the, I don't have a green thumb, but suddenly I leave your music on when I, go to work, and in 1 month, my plants have tripled in size. So this is not what's called a controlled scientific experiment, but it's pretty amazing when you start getting a bunch of letters like that. And then we started hearing from people who said, I could never fall asleep. I now sleep well. Parents who have in family therapy with wife and husband. Dr. Virginia Satir, one of my first mentors and supporters, said, I play this music in the background and people start communicating more deeply than ever. So it's my go-to soundtrack. And then in the massage world, people started playing it all the time. I had no idea that my music was played in more massage treatment rooms than anybody else, certainly before online music was available, because it worked. I was invited to a keynote at the National Massage, American Massage Therapy Association in 1990. I'm going to tell them all about the healing powers of music, because that's what I was talking about. And they said, we don't need that. I said, okay, how many of you are familiar with my music? 90% of the hands went up. There's 1,000 people in the room. They said, okay, tell us something we don't know. We know your music works. Now tell us something new. That was mind-blowing, that my music was that so helpful to that healing modality. But also, when I was at that first Zen center back in Santa Cruz area, they also did massage. And I got my first professional massage there, but the masseur, the guy who was also on staff, did it to Beethoven's music. And I'm getting pounded and I'm going, I thought massage is supposed to be relaxing. This sucks. I feel worse now than I did before I came in here. He says, well, if you don't like it, do something, better. So I would make my own little reel-to-reel tapes, and that's what I would get massaged to. My first gigs were actually playing live music when other people were getting massaged. I'm going, hey, what about it? Give the piano player some. It was like, what about me? Who's going to massage me? And that was one of the other reasons I started doing recordings, so that I could meditate without having to play, so I could get a massage, listening to music that everyone else was saying was so good, that I found was really, really good. So that was where it was. But again, in 1975, I still had no business background. Was talk about starting business on a shoestring. I made every mistake that could be made. I also hired people who said they knew how to do stuff, and they made lots of mistakes. I also learned that people would tell you stuff, either they were legends in their own mind, or because there was no one who was doing what I was doing before me, there was no template. There was no one that I could look at. Like, there were indie blues and indie jazz labels, but I was a new genre. I had to explain to the media to try to get publicity why my music was different, why it was new. I would start out from graduate school using words like, well, it's a modern adaptation, it's neo-impressionism, and no one knew what that meant. And okay, some ideological predecessors were Debussy and Ravel and Scriabin, the Russian mystic composer. No one knew, they knew about Debussy, but all these concepts. Well, it turns out that Debussy and Ravel and the Impressionists were also tuning into music of the Orient. Coltrane was tuning into Indian music. A lot of people, understand that now, but at the time, that's where the modal aspect, McCoy Tyner playing in one key, not going through all the chord changes, is a complete shift from giant steps, 2 chord changes per measure, da, 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 blazing speed, a very different mindset, a very different amount of brain, a very different spectrum of brainwave activity. That is in the high beta range. Where I function is in the deep alpha and the deep theta range. The graduate school that I was at, part of the other reason I went there, they had the best biofeedback equipment in Northern California. The only place that had better equipment in a school was UCLA. And they wouldn't let me in there because I applied there, applied to Stanford, applied to UC Berkeley. They said, we'll let you take one elective after you do all our requirements in grad school to get a degree. And I'm going, no, you don't understand. I need to know now. And then, when Dr. Krippner had said, here's a place that you could do what you want and do the furthest out research. And again, I had no idea that I was going to start a record company at that point, but I did. I should mention this. So in 1975, with this first little album, I go up to the NARM, National Association of Record Merchandisers in San Francisco, and I meet John Frank, the head of Columbia Special Products. And I say, I got an album. This is people are starting to meditate. They need to learn how to relax. Stress was just becoming a national concept. And he says, basically taps you on the head and says, thank you very much. Where's the beat? Where's the melody? Where's your name? But also establish a track record. Come back and see me in a year. And in that year, my first 1,000 records sold, and then the next 1,000 sold, and then 2,000 sold, and it was doubling every couple of months. And I go, I don't need to be with a major label. Now, it would have been, in retrospect, it would have been really good if I had money for real advertising, but I didn't. So I would have been good if I was able to hire a PR company. Didn't have the money. So I would call up radio stations. I would call up the TV stations, and some of them would let me on and some of them wouldn't. And if they let me on, I got kicked off of some, but other ones, because I'm also talking about the concept of music for healing. And every one of the, whether it's AM San Francisco, AM LA, all the morning shows that were on in those eras, so we've never heard anyone talk about that. We've never heard about the concept of music and healing. So I was the first person to put that out there in the public. And it was at that point that the field of holistic medicine was starting to come out, long before even Dr. Andrew Weil, long before Dr. Deepak Chopra went national. I was talking about the healing powers of music as an ancient healing art, which it was in Egypt, in Greece, in China. And these were things that I had been studying in college and in grad school. So when I would get on an interview, like I was on with a very nasty host in Alaska, in Anchorage, when I was up at a conference, who starts telling me, well, what you're doing is not music and blah, blah, blah. And because I'm a musicologist also, I just ran down cross-cultural kinds of music that don't feature the Western European approach to music, and pointed out how limited the Western European musical tradition is, and talked about African music and Asian music and all this. And as I'm explaining this, his station manager calls up and says, I like this guy. I want to have his music on our station. Be nice to him. And suddenly he flips and he says, well, this is really very interesting. And people all over Anchorage, I was told afterwards at the conference the next day, were cheering because he had eviscerated every other guest from our conference at that time. So I stood up to him. I stood up to, again, another fluke. I was in LA for another conference. Somebody canceled on the Tom Snyder show. I get a call that afternoon. You want to be on TV tonight? Sure. Where? Tom Snyder show. After Johnny Carson, it was the biggest show late night. I show up there and no rehearsal, no nothing. Talk to Tom Snyder. I have no media training. I look back at that, the recording I have of it. I talk over him. I ramble. But it was enough that he got interested. Said, wow, this is fantastic. Now play some of this music. And after I do it, I said, wow, I feel so relaxed. We got to have you back on. We got to zone out America. He got fired, so we never got to do a follow-up. But that was the first time America had heard music to balance the chakras, music for meditation, music for healing. And that helped put me on the map. And then all these other conferences and all these other cities was like, well, we'd like you to be at our conference, and we'd like you to do a concert here. And for the next 25 years, I was pretty much a solo act, flying from my San Francisco airport to cities all around the country and setting up my own PR, setting up my own interviews, doing the concert, being my own roadie pretty much. And then when the rentals of Fender Rhodes became so difficult, because a lot of them were played by very hard bashing rock guys or jazz guys. If you're playing by yourself and you're missing 8 keys, it's hard to play in all the keys of the rainbow, or C, D, E, F, G, A, B, if you're missing those keys. So I started playing just grand piano, and that's how I developed my chops on grand piano, by being forced to do it because it was easier. One time I traveled with my Fender Rhodes, and it was broken by the airlines. So that was not going to, be a workable thing. If you're not a rock band with a van or roadies, you have to rent. And then I just started playing places that had a good grand piano, and word would get out and somebody would hear me there. So, oh, we'd like you to come to our city. And that was organically how my career grew. But the other thing that was different about me than George Winston or anybody else is I was a musician who could speak. I was invited to the science conferences, to the humanistic psychology conferences, and I became a keynote presenter talking about the healing powers of music, the holistic medicine of music. No one else was talking about that, and that put me on the map. And that album that I was featuring through most of those years was Spectrum Suite. And to this day, Spectrum Suite is still referenced in so many books. But when yoga became mainstream in 1998 and 99, Spectrum Suite sales were going down, and all these imitations were coming out, but they had the word chakras in them. And the stores that were selling chakra candles and chakra bed sheets and chakra oils, I'm going, hey, here's chakra music. And they say, we don't see that. Why should we carry it? If you want to be serious, you got to have the word chakra on your album. And the very original title of that suite was the Chakra Suite, but stores said, chocolate? What flavor? It's like, it was too early. I changed the title to become Chakra Suite. Sales went up 500% in 3 months. And that's where Chakra Suite was and has been ever since. It's the best-selling meditation album of all time. Spectrum Suite was named as the most influential New Age healing album of all time in 1999. The problem was at a certain point, just like what you were saying about the Holy Grail, people were searching for Spectrum Suite, paying $50 for an LP. I had only a few left in my own archives. To have Spectrum Suite and Chocolate Suite out in the world of brick and mortar stores would not carry it. So I had to go with the one that's selling the best. But with the online expansion of available titles, I said, well, if all these people are asking for Spectrum Suite, I can now put it out there, which I did a couple of years ago, and not have it cannibalize Chakra Suite. Now, I did put out and will put out a vastly sonically improved version of the Something for Everybody Suite. And that'll be on my website. I'll get it up on YouTube.
Are you doing a new version? You're doing a new version?
No, it's not the new version. It's a sonically improved version. So we use all the latest Pro Tools, restoration. Can't go in because it's only a 2-track off the LP, but sonically it sounds much better. My trumpet isn't as harsh. Again, in that first set, we had no time to do a lot of sound checks on the trumpet. I had no time to warm up, and I probably had a cup of coffee that day. So I was a little hyped up, and as I started playing my Miles Davis modality, I got into my Maynard Ferguson mindset, and that's where most of that solo was up beyond what most trumpet players play. And it was like I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stop doing it until I stopped, and then drum it shit, and then put that down, came back and added the guitar, added the Rhodes, etc. But when I played the first track on bass with the drummer, it was all just, I'd look at him and go, okay, we're going to change. And he followed me perfectly, no rehearsal. I've never played. In fact, that was the last time I saw him. I don't even know his last name now, but he said he has to be called El Cito, which is Otis backwards, because he had another contract that he couldn't use his name on. But Otis, wherever you are, man, I thank you. And it was great. And the reason that album, that track was sampled so much, a lot of that had to do with his break with the phase shifting. Now, what also happened is a number of other people did. I found out in 1993, 94, that that track particularly was being sampled and used in the rave chill rooms in Europe. No one ever contacted me, and we want to get to your question that you wrote me about sampling, but no one ever contacted me, said, hey, thank you, we're using your music. And then when I found out that it was being sampled, no one ever, said, hey, we'd like to buy the rights, we'd like to, get permission to use it. It was just used. And I didn't even know about it because I'm not in Europe and I'm not at raves. And I tried, I had a producer said, let's put out your own rave-friendly album. And he put it out before it was finished when I was out on tour. So the album was terrible. It's not listed in my discography. And I don't, because it wasn't finished. But the concept was, and then I met actually one of the people who had been sampling that and using that on his album. He was a British rock star that you might know, Steve Hillage. And I met him in 1978 because I was back at the big New Age Festival of Mind, Body, Spirit in London. And I was the first American to present there. And I was a big hit. And they invited me back to be featured in the Center Pavilion in the second year. So I walk in there, coming off the plane, I see a big rainbow dome, and I walk up and there's a beautiful, woman at the exhibit, and I'm hearing my music. And I go, wow, the music's pretty good. Who did that music? She says, Steve. And what's Steve's last name? And she says, Hillage. I go, what? Could you pronounce that again? Hillage. He had done some note for note cop of the music. That's not even a sample. That's just a straight ripoff. So that was pretty weird. And since he was a major artist and had a lawyer and I didn't, that was all it was. But 20 years later, I met him at a party in LA. And it was a party that was still when MDA was legal. And there was some major, I won't mention the names, except the one whose house it was, Marilyn Ferguson, who wrote the book, The Aquarian Conspiracy. She was also at that conference in Alaska that I was at, and she did not go on the radio with that nasty host. And that's how I got the gig. She said, I don't want to go on there. You go on there. She is passed now, so I could tell the story. I walk in, and Steve Hillage is sitting mellow on a couch, and I see him. I go, well, hot damn. I just walk right up. Hey, Hillage, let me ask you something. He gets up, runs out, leaves the party. I mean, he knew he was busted and would not even apologize. I did, by the way, also, since you asked how I feel about sampling, I'm into collaboration where there's an energy exchange, whether it's monetary or some kind of energy exchange. Where it's just one-sided and it's all take and no share, that never felt right, energetically and otherwise. So I'm on my third album. This one was called Starborn Suite. Came out. Side 2 was recorded after being invited to Findhorn community outside of in northern Scotland. I would imagine most of the people don't know about Findhorn. It was really famous in the 70s. That was a spiritual community that, because the leaders were communicating with what they describe as the spirits of nature, the nature spirits, the spirit of a cabbage, spirit of a rose. They're growing vegetables out of the snow in northern Scotland. So they were world famous at the time. And I had met at that first conference, the festival, the leader, Peter Caddy, and says, we'd love to have you visit our Findhorn community. So I go, well, I'll extend my stay in England. I take a train, I go up there, and I wind up doing some recording that was very magical. But I come back, I do the album, and side 1 was recorded as a soundtrack for the leading psychic healer in England at the time, Rose Gladden. Now, this came out in early 1978. Middle of 78, the album's out in the market. I'm on an interview in Berkeley, which is for the leading interview show at the time called New Dimensions Radio. Host is Michael Toms, very famous, a great interviewer. And as I'm being interviewed, the engineer puts on my music, so we think. And we're talking about my music. And I'm going out, well, here, you see there's no chord progression, there's no this, there's no, obvious melody, it's very ambient. And all of a sudden, it's like my head jerks. I go, wait a minute, I didn't play that note. What album is he playing? And he says, engineer, what album are you playing? Oh, I put the wrong one on. It's the new album by Brian Eno. Okay, so Eno obviously had listened to this one. I tried writing him at the time. There was an address in New York City. So when I was on tour in New York City, I went to the address. It's an address that doesn't exist. So, I never got to meet him then. But about 12 years ago, he's speaking in San Francisco. And I was in the audience, and I made sure to run up as he was coming down off stage. I introduced myself, and he knows who I am. And I start to say something as, oh, I can't talk to you now, and runs out. So those are my two direct aspects on sampling, and by people who could have been much more gracious, or since they were much more famous than I was, could have been a little helpful, or could have acknowledged. And in fact, they told me on that interview that Eno had done on the station, he had acknowledged me as being an influence. And Halpern really understands this concept of ambient music. But then, of course, I was left out of all future comments by Eno, and it was a whole separate thing. But some of those stories, you don't forget when you meet somebody like that, because I've met other people like Larry Coryell and some of the musicians I've known over the years who knew the music. And Coryell was one of my mentors. I actually hitched when I was still in college. I hitched. I can't believe that I actually did some of the things that I know I did. I hitchhiked from Buffalo to Toronto to catch his band with Jimmy Pepper and Mike Mandel up in Toronto. I wound up staying on the floor in his hotel room because I had no way to get back to Buffalo after the gig. We didn't connect for years, but when he was playing out in San Francisco in 1973, I got permission to take the jazz improv class that I was teaching at Foothill College on a field trip. And nobody believed that I knew Larry Coryell and that I had played with Larry Coryell. I actually had not played with him at that point, but I knew him. I go back to visit him backstage. He says, "Oh yeah, man, sure. Come out and sit in with us. Second set. Get up, second set. Halpern, come on upstage." I played the best solo of my life, and I hit a triple high F at the end of my solo, blacked out, fell down. People thought I died. It was a very dramatic way to end my trumpet career, in a sense. I was invited to join the band. I said, "No, my gig is out here now, but thank you very much." About 20 years later, I see him also. He's out in California gigging. I go backstage and he says, "Man, I got to thank you. Now that I'm sober, my therapist told me I need to learn how to meditate. He gave me your album." And he goes, "Wait a minute, I know that dude." And that's how I reconnected with Larry Coryell. And we were talking for several years about recording an album together, and we're just making plans when he died. So that was an album I was really looking forward to. We didn't get into specifics. I had actually given him an advance on the album, and he's just such a beautiful guy. And I will admit this. Number one, I was jamming Larry Coryell licks with Rick Derringer at Rick's apartment in the Village in August 1969, before Rick got to be a rock and roll superstar, when he was just leaving the McCoys. And we're going, "Well, do you know this lick?" And both of us showed each other Larry Coryell licks. And one of the licks on side 2 of Christening For Listening is a slowed down version of a Larry Coryell lick. Very slow.
Okay, I know.
Right?
Yeah, I know which one you're talking about.
Right. So that was that. And
well, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about your album achieving holy grail status amongst the hip hop generation of beat diggers and crate diggers and collectors?
I was astonished. I was blown away. The engineer I spoke to recently, in fact, I forwarded him your email with the phrase "holy grail," and it was like, holy shit, we had no idea. Man, for years, I couldn't give, of course, number one, you couldn't give the album away. Number two, the fact that people even found it. But number three, the fact that there's distortion. I mean, as a purist, distortion hurts my nervous system. So I was always working with the best studios, the best quality recordings in the Bay Area, and distortion was not in my vocabulary. So I listened to that very first album, at least on the versions that I've heard, and maybe, well, whatever it is, it sounds distorted. Even side 2, it sounds better. But until we did the restoration and got rid of the pops and clicks, but people say, we love the pops and clicks in that.
Pops and clicks are part of what makes it.
Right. Well, for me, it doesn't. But where I am now, and this is the big change, man. Up until about 2 years ago, as I'm watching all my income from CD sales going down and down and down. And then in 2016, when the major distributor of this kind of music, Allegro, I'll give a shout out, Allegro Media Corporation, did a really nasty thing. They ripped off 100 labels, went out of business overnight, stole 10,000 of my CDs, didn't pay me for six months of royalties, and did that to 100 other labels. Basically killed off the field of new age music because a lot of the labels couldn't continue pressing. I'm thinking about it going back. I'm gonna have to start being a music teacher again. I'll consult on holistic health. And with the rise of the streaming music, which I fought for years, when Napster came out, I knew that was wrong because that was just piracy. And when I saw all of my albums, this gets back to it, how I feel about even this album. I saw albums that came out on cassette that had maybe sold 200. I don't even know how that guy got a copy, but all of my albums were up on his Napster site. So I had my lawyer sue him. He countersued me. And I go, what the hell is, what's going on with this world? So I contacted Metallica's lawyer down in LA. He had no idea who I was. I want to join your class action lawsuit against, Napster. He said, how many albums do you sell? And I told him, I said, come back when you sell, 100,000. Come back when you do this. So I couldn't get on any class action suit, and it was just all ripoffs. Much to my surprise, between YouTube, which was putting up all, every track on an album for free, where I have on my wall checks from Google for 32 cents a month. This is not a living wage. That's less than the price of a stamp. Somehow, when I guess, all the different subscription services got on, the economy of scale changed from going to a couple thousand people listening to music to people saying, hey, hey, Alexa, play some Halpern. Millions of people are playing my music now. So it's not just the hip hop people in the audience. So whether it's vinyl or whatever, what that has provided me is an income again. And it is going back to that original meditation in the woods. My mission was to get the music out in the world. And now it is, if this is what you like and this is what you want, and you want to sample this, number one, come to me and I'll work with you on it. Let's do it legally. But I am delighted. I was shocked, at first, because I've heard other people, and particularly some of the millennials. There's a guy named Douglas McGowan, who's working with a company called Light in the Attic Records. There's Mark Griffey, who has a website devoted to that. There's a guy in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, named Steve Targo, who just voted Spectrum Suite the most relaxing music ever. I mean, how does this guy even know about it? He's like, younger. So all these younger people, how did they even find out about it? But I love it. And the fact that the bottom line, the music is getting out there. And now I haven't heard most people, when they sample it, what they've done on top of it. So if you could hook me up with what they've done with my music, I'd be interested in hear that. In Florida, in 2002, I had met a wonderful woman who I was spending some time with, and she said, oh, there's a great guitarist named Michael Bianco. He's playing over one of your tracks from one of your albums. And that album is called Cruise Control, which I had left one track intentionally without a lead guitar on it, because most of the album features this other great guitarist. And it was my pre-produced track. I go into the club and he's playing two guitars at the same time. He's one of those, one of the very few. He's so good that he would blow away the major artists and they wouldn't book him as an opening act. But he's playing incredible stuff on top of my album. And I felt great about that. He loved the track, and we were gonna do some recording, and then it never happened. But collaboration, I'm into. When I first recorded with Paul Horn, I should mention this, in 1984, the great musician Paul Horn, that album, which I recorded and produced, that was my first album with a non-new age musician, a major label artist. He was the first person I went to in 1976 when I had my first album and said, I'd like to record with you. That was the same year I visited Ravi Shankar backstage when he was in concert in San Francisco. Paul Horn was in concert in San Francisco. Here's my first album. They look at that plant and they go, we don't get it. So there was no thing. And Paul said, no, come back after you, establish a career. And a couple of years later, I did. And he wound up hiring my business manager, asked me for help. I helped him set up his own label when he was dropped by Columbia. And that was when I said, well, you remember when you invited me to record? Let's record now. And that album wound up being great. It was more jazzy, so it wasn't so much meditative, because Paul's a jazz guy. But I said, but let's do kind of a new age jazz thing. So if you haven't heard Connections, check it out. It's wonderfully produced. And there was a moment that I think we have time to mention this, where we rehearsed for about 10 seconds, which was, okay, the first song will be in D minor, Follow Me. We meditated for about 30 seconds and they began to play. And he would follow me. I said, next song, okay, I'll follow you. The third song was my song. It was an F minor, D flat, B flat progression. An unusual progression. He had never played it. We start playing, and this is where the magic of music comes in. We're playing, and he improvised a beautiful melody, playing the changes, and then he starts doing the solo, and it is so incredible. I am blown away by what he's playing. I'm trying to remember to keep my fingers on the keyboard to not lose track of what I'm doing, and that's going on. And then he stops, I do my solo, and at the end of my solo, I'm thinking, okay, my solo's done. Paul, come on back in. We both open our eyes at the same time. He shoots me a look. Soul look. We connected on a soul level. And that was the basis of our friendship and relationship for the rest of his life. And I helped give him a whole new career. And that album got me the deal that I got with Gramavision. They said, man, if you're not only a musician, but you could produce an album that good, we want you on our new label. Now, that deal did not work out well. That's another story, and some of that will probably be in the book. But what was also interesting, they hired a Grammy-winning CD mastering guy, George Horn, no relation to Paul Horn, at Berkeley at Fantasy Records, to master the record. I'm there. I said, I want to be at the session. He starts cranking up the treble. Paul Horn plays golden flute, has the best flute tone in the world. And this engineer is making it sound like a tin whistle. I said, what the hell are you doing? Number one, that's not what it should sound like. Paul Horn is going to kill me. Number two, I was in the room. I know what it's supposed to sound like. That's always been part of my thing. I hear the music. I know what it needs, what it's supposed to sound like. I don't need a producer. That's why I've always been my own producer. And I grab my master, I take it back. He says, you can't walk out of it. I said, I just did. I walk out. By the time I get home, I have a lawsuit coming from Gramavision saying, you pissed off a Grammy award-winning producer. I said, wait a minute, he's messing up my album. You know, I will pay for my own CD mastering, but it's going to be done right. And no one had ever talked to George Horn like that. No one had ever talked to a record label like that. I did. You know, I come from New York, and that was part of my integrity of the music and what it is. So these are stories that no one knows, but it's fights that I've had, and most of them fights that I've won, and some that I didn't. But it's in service of the music, in service of the muse, and keeping the integrity of the music. But if another genre says we want the pops and the hiss and whatever, there's an aspect of generational difference. I'm older than a lot of the people. That's not what my body likes. But if it works for them, I am a believer in, if it works for you, whether it's food or medicine or vax or no vax, you have to go with what works for you. And so I've become a lot more ecumenical and accepting in my as an elder now, as opposed to, you know, no way you're going to do that. And I've had lawsuits against people who would license my music and put out really messed up versions. I got invited to do a soundtrack for one of my other early albums. Somebody bought an old boombox that had a cassette in it of an album called Corridors of Time, one of my other early spacey synthesizer ones. They loved it. We want to use it as the soundtrack. I said, I need to hear what you're talking about. The tape was twisted. So he was hearing backward tape, and he loved it. Oh, it sounds really spacey. Well, people have said enough things about me over the years, how spacey I am, all these rumors about, you know, drug use, which is not true. I've always been a microdose kind of guy because my body wouldn't let me do a lot of stuff. But no, you can't take an album, twist the tape around and put my name on it, because that's not what I do. I don't put out distorted music. That's under my label. But if someone else is finding it, use it, or then they're doing other things with it, I would like to hear what they're doing. If you could turn me on to, and as I say, if you could hook me on to where some of the samples have gone, I'd be interested in hearing where it's gone and what it's transformed into or what it's expanded into. So I would look forward to that, So that was one of the things, the first things when you asked about sampling, that was one of the first thoughts I had is, yeah, I've heard that it's sampled. I haven't heard any examples because no one has ever said, hey man, here's what we've done with what you gave to us. And other than the guitar player with two hands, because I heard him and it was fantastic. But that was, a whole other thing. So
that's why I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, so I know I've been talking a lot, but I've had a couple of days to build up some energy for this.
No, it's okay. I'm like blown away just by listening to a lot of the stories that you managed to share with us here on the Rare Groove Revolution podcast. And I also wanted to ask you, like, just getting back to the Something for Everybody suite.
Yes.
For a second. Okay, so that was all mainly overdubs, right? What was the main intention for that song? Like, what was the main inspiration for that song? Because for those of you who might not have heard the album, the rest of the album is just pure Fender Rhodes for the most part. And so this was a complete deviation. The Something for Everybody Sweet song is a complete deviation from all that. So what made you decide to just go to the left?
Great question. That was where I came from. I came from soul jazz. I came from John Coltrane, Miles Davis jazz. I came from, and the last 2.5 minutes where we get into the real chill portion, that was all unexpected. Part of why I did that was because as a starving musician in 1975, I said, I will use the last song on the album as a calling card for my teaching career to show that I could play all these instruments, I know all these styles, and I will get a lot of gigs. I was a clinician. I would go around to high schools and say, I could teach your trumpet players, I could teach your sax players to be better musicians. And I said, here, listen to this. And they go, oh, okay, we're gonna hire him to do a week of classes for our band. And I got individual students. So it was basically just as a way to advertise to myself that I'm a musician. I could do other things. And indeed, I got contacted by somebody who was the head of, at that point, it was a label called, I think it was Inner City Records from Chicago. They were a jazz label. And they said, wow, we heard the album, we see these things. And I had an ad, little flyer that I stuck around Palo Alto saying, new teacher in town, and here's all the people I've played with. I've sat in with Larry Coryell, with Rick Derringer, with Rahsaan Roland Kirk, and people that I had sat in with. Joe Ford was not famous in those days yet. And still a lot of people don't know him. Great guy, great musician. And he called me up and says, hey, we'd like to produce your second album. And since I had no money, I go, okay, great. So we said, well, you did 7 chakras, and I'm aware of the research relating the 12 astrological signs to the 12 chromatic keynotes in an octave. So I said, we're going to call the album Zodiac Suite. I was aware of the books on it, and as a researcher, I don't have as much familiarity with astrology as chakras, but it seemed like a good platform to base a new form of music that had and no audience, that people had no way to understand what this new music was, because they didn't understand meditation in those days. They didn't understand holistic medicine. It was in the early days of that field. So he said, well, we have a studio in San Francisco. We'll pay for it. You'll go up there. Mike Bloomfield just recorded there. Now, I love Mike Bloomfield from the Blues Project before that, but from Electric Flag.
Electric Flag with Buddy Miles, yeah.
Right. Well, even before Buddy, the first version.
And Stills. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Right. And when my 8-piece band started in Buffalo, our main inspirations were Chicago, when there was still CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, Electric Flag, And so I knew all the trumpet solos, and I would play the trumpet solos and then blow them away. And when we met Chicago, I was hoping to have a battle of the bands. We didn't get to that, but I would have blown Lee away at that point when I was still had my chops. But great band. And then, of course, they gave up their jazz chops to become famous as a pop band.
They are
But
today.
backstage, when they played in Buffalo in 1968, they were saying, we're going to take jazz and we're going to do Horace Silver and Art Blakey, and we're going to do all these horn things, which they were doing in the first album. Great, but they weren't great soloists, per se, other than guitar player.
Terry Cat.
Great musician. All the band was great. And so Electric Flag, so Bloomfield won, and he said, and we can get Mike Bloomfield to sit on your album, to play on your album. So I was sold. So I go up to this little studio in San Francisco called Blossom Studios, and the piano was out of tune. It wasn't as good as the first studio I worked with. I didn't know how bad the recording was until I got the test pressing, because I have no way to play it on reel-to-reel. I take it home, and it sounds like shit. I go, it's all distortion. There's this. I bring it to my first studio guy, and I said, can you fix this? Now, this is the album that I went to the first day, January 4th, 1975, and he listened to it and said, man, this is unfixable, but I'll make you an offer. You give me your next album to record here at the Music Annex, and I will re-record your Zodiac suite for free. I said, sold. So we go in there and we do the album. Now, I also had to buy my way out. When I heard how bad that first pressing was, I bought my way out of that contract when I had no money and had to borrow money from everywhere I could to break that contract, to get my rights back. The cover was, everything was wrong about the graphics, the cover. Again, this will be in my book, how many mistakes other people made. And then I put out the album, the Zodiac Suite. It's coming back, it'll be online. I knew not to make it too long now. There's some great music on there, and there's a great blues on side 2 called Blues for Arcturus. And that's gonna be on my upcoming album, of my blues album. I've had blues on a blues track on a number of my albums that most people never heard or never put together. And I come from the background, certainly in high school, late high school, and early college, of being a jazz snob. Blues, man, there's only 3 chords. It's boring, 5 notes. And my first consciousness raising, I'll tell you who it was. I interviewed James Cotton. I wanted, Buffalo had the Spring Arts Festival, and it was a blues festival. And I wanted to go to the concerts. I had no money. How do you get into a concert if you don't have any money? I went to the school paper and said, let me review the concert. Let me interview James Cotton. Got my first press pass. I interviewed James Cotton, and I don't have a recording of it, but I kind of asked him, don't you get bored playing the same notes? I mean, I laugh about it now. And he says, no, man, I'm a son of a preacher. We are sharing information with all the things that blues does. And it was a consciousness shift, and I got it. And then as I started really understanding the fine tunings of the phrasings and all the feelings, and blues is, much more than just 3 chords and a feeling, or country is just 3 chords and a feeling. It's all the micro tunings and all the other things that go on with that. And unknown, as I say, so I'm putting it in an anthology of the 18 albums that I've had a blues track on over the years that nobody knows, except one album I did call Deja Blues in, about 2000, that had several blues on it. And that's going to be reissued. And that was a bestseller. It was had a Middle Eastern type rhythm going on, very trance induction, very trancy, very hypnotic. And one of the other albums I will mention, in those early days, based on my ethnomusicology research, coming from my trance music interest and exploring that. I was on my way to Morocco to study, and the master musicians of Morocco, of Jajouka, after I came out to California when I was in grad school. I never came back to Buffalo, never went to grad school in Buffalo, and never got to Morocco. But I got into some music in the studio with a drummer that when we put it on the album called Here to Eternity, which will be coming out soon, it was only on cassette, at a New York expo in 1979, this beautiful belly dancer comes up and is dancing to the music, and wow, this is trancey. But wait a minute, who gave you permission to use one of our sacred rhythms? This is one that we teach in our sacred sisterhood. And I said, you know, the drummer channeled this in the studio, and I put the other tracks together. At which point she said, well, in that case, why don't you come home with me? And I'll show you some other stuff. And that was one of the best benefits of, you know, because in my genre, there were not a lot of groupies, but that was a wonderful relationship with a wonderful woman. And, but we tapped into something that I had never heard, the drummer had never heard. He, in the studio, he said, after we played it, and this has happened with many of the musicians that I've worked with, including Paul Horn, he said, I have never played that before. If you listen on Connections, there's a song called, and I'll mention this in the book, of course, it's called Fantasy Flight. Paul Horn plays solos, highlighting the different countries and modes and places where he's traveled, and then he overdubs. And how it happened, I'm going to leave that for the book, but at the end of it, we were all spellbound. And he said, I have never played that before. There is a magic that has happened in the studio with me and my muse and my guides, and however it all comes together, that many of the musicians have tapped into. So I don't take credit for it, but I was there, and it never happened with other things. And it happened with David Darling. It happened with Paul McCandless. And I would say, and I will say here, and I've said some of their best recorded music happened on my albums. And I have the proof on the recordings to back it up. And you listen to their tone, their creativity, and what happens. And the fact that they then said, wow, what just happened? And when you have a musician say that to you, who's a world-class musician, you know that something special just happened. You may not know what it was, but something special happened. And that's the magic of music. And that's what keeps me involved in doing new recordings. A couple of years ago, when I was out of money and the distributors were out of business, I said, my recording career might be over. And am I okay with it? And now with the pandemic, my concert career may be over. And I had to get okay with that. And concerts, I'm okay with. Recordings are still a place where I tap in, and I get so high when I get into that zone. For me, that's like the highest meditation. And it's where I feel so much bliss that it's part of what keeps me sane also, you know, through the lockdown and through all these years of no money. And now with income, either way, it's the music. Plus what the people, of course, going back to that, something for everybody, I did it because it was good to dance and do some fast lovemaking too. But most of the comments that I've gotten over the years from lovers, from partners, husbands and wives and all that, is the romantic, the tantra aspect of our music, where the music keeps you in that place that you get a heart connection and you can really breathe together, and you get into those really good cuddle moments and intimacy and rapport moments. And that's why my music has been like a #1 music in the whole tantra, loving field, tantra yoga field, in the yoga field, in the massage field. And none of them want to hear about something for everybody. So one of the reasons I did sign my major label deal in 1985 was they wanted to do 2 labels for me. One, my new age healing music, and one that was jazzier. So I did an album with David Friesen that was great, that went nowhere. They lost it. They didn't put it out, or they put it out and then hit it. And other albums I've done that the stores would say, I did want to mention this, we only have room for 4 of your albums. Do you want to have 4 that we know are proven sellers, or you want to get this new one that may not sell? And then when you get something that's rhythmical and people buy it because they see my name on it, and then they send it back and says, we bought this album because we like your music, but we can't use this. I said, did you read the liner notes? It says, this is not for meditation. This is rhythmic. I'm working with a Nigerian master drummer on one album. They say, no, we don't read. We just see your name and we buy. But when you get, hundreds of albums coming back from your distributor, and the distributor saying, we don't know if we're going to carry your next album if you give us another one of these, you got no choice. Now, with the streaming universe, I go through the Orchard distributor. They will put any of my albums up. I could put albums that have been out of print for 40 years and now have a new audience. So you will find Something for Everybody Suite on its own as a single up soon. And if I get a really good pressing of Christening for Listening, but the only versions I've heard for side A are too distorted for me to listen to. And if I can't listen to it, I have a hard time. But when I listen to the new version of Something for Everybody that we've improved, it's a gas. Man, when my lady friend dances to that one, I get turned on all over it. It serves the purpose that it was designed for. So I know it works, and I would look forward to hearing what other people are doing with it. And that's the story of where that one went and why it's able to come back now. The great universe of the streaming music world has given new life, reincarnated albums that have been dead or out of circulation. They didn't sell when they came out. No one knew about it for 30 years. And suddenly people, are finding some of these albums, and they were good then. I knew they were good, but we couldn't sell them. They're good now, and they're going to sound better because we can make them sound even better. They sound better than the original analog recordings. That's how good Pro Tools restoration is. And I work with a master engineer named Warren Kahn. We've been working together for 25 years. We have a shorthand. He knows what I'm going for. So the few times I've had to work with a new engineer, it's like pulling teeth. He said, oh, you need to crank up the treble here. No. This session is over. I need to get this sound spectrum. We need to go for this. So I have my proprietary reverb settings, my echo settings. My Rhodes piano is different than any other Rhodes out in the world. Always was, and it's better now. When they came back into existence in 2010, I read about it in Keyboard Magazine, immediately placed my order. I had to wait for Herbie Hancock to get his before I got mine. And then when I got it, the whole new series of recordings that became Deep Alpha, Deep Theta, Ocean of Bliss, Cannabis Dreams, and some of my other albums happened because I had a Rhodes piano to work with. I did piano albums, but the Rhodes is a sound that people had never heard. There were jazz guys using it. Herbie, of course, was one of the first. Miles turned him onto it. But in the jazz context, it's different than when it's just allowed to be featured on its own. And in the early years of New Age music, there were people that said New Age music is the sound of the Fender Rhodes electric piano. And of course, not everybody agreed with that, but my album was the first one that was out there. And I've never heard, as a solo instrument, there's no synthesizer that compares. You could get close with a Nord and some of the other ones, but that's in a band. As a solo, I need the Rhodes and the touch and the control I have. And I'll tell you, when I bought my first one, I played every one in the store, and I got the one that felt best to me. And the salesman goes, are you going to play every one in the store? I go, yep. And as a musician, that's how you find your instrument. And I did the same thing with pianos. I played 100 grand pianos before I got the one that I bought for me at home. And, the fact that your instrument can be so personal. Well, a lot of musicians feel that way about their instrument. And I've been fortunate to have had the opportunity to find my instrument. And it was life changing. The day I got my Rhodes, my life changed. I heard it in my head, my life changed. And then when I got my first one, and you know where I saw the first Rhodes played live? Was at the Both And in San Francisco. My first year out there, my band that I was sitting into, his band that I was sitting into on trumpet, was opening for Herbie Hancock. And between sets, Herbie's warming up and he plays a glissando. And I stop in my tracks. I go, that's what I heard in my head. And I went over and said, Herbie, what is that? Because he didn't know where it was, didn't care. He said, oh man, this is the Fender Rhodes. And oh, that's just a glissando. And I go, not for me, it ain't. You know, where do I get one of those? Well, Don Weir's Music City. I was there the next day. And got that.
As a musician, I'm sorry, not to. As a musician, as a pioneer of new age music, how does it feel to be one of the most imitated musicians of all time?
It's a mixed bag. And thank you for saying that. They were good. It's a blessing and a curse. I've heard some note for note cops. I heard one the other day on Sound Choices on Comcast. It was, I think the guy's last name, it was Steven something, and it was Chakra something. And he mastered my touch. It was the first time I heard somebody copy me really well. So that one I enjoyed. I've heard a lot of bad versions of my music, and that does not feel right. And of course, you know, that's just what it is. But with anything, you know, if you get out there, there's always people in any line of business. This is one of the things I learned about when I studied business and marketing, is there are going to be people copy you. You see this in advertising all the time. You see one vacuum cleaner on TV, suddenly there's 3 copies doing the same thing. You see a Dyson, and then you see Shark copying the same thing, the same words. You see there's so many, so that's the way of the world. And I had to relax into that. At first it was like, well, how could they do that to me? I'm a spiritual guy. I don't cheat. I'm honest. I do other things. It's like, we don't care. You know, you put it out there, it's fair game, and we're going to rip you off. And some of the ones that have been the most outrageous, some of the people I know, some of them I helped get into the business in the first place. And those are weird. And some of them, when they cut too close, I had to sue to stop them, because my lawyer said, if you don't, you won't be able to say that your album was the first album to balance chakras and balance your brainwaves into deep alpha and deep theta state. So I won that lawsuit. Since we're talking New York, early on, I was sued. I got a fake lawyer letter by the guy that was doing environments, and said that you can't use my word psychoacoustics for his environments series. Irv Tybell, he did the Ultimate Seashore and a whole bunch of those nature recordings. So he writes me, and I know it was, I had just moved into my new house. It was 1979. And he goes, okay, you're infringing on my copyright of the word psychoacoustics. And I said, schmuck, you know, I know who invented the word. It was Dr. Helmholtz in Germany in 1885. So I wrote back a letter, and I made it clear to him that I would eat his lunch in court. Never heard from him again. And several years after that, talk about sampling. So here's the other side of it. I was put together with the principal second violinist of the San Francisco Symphony named Daniel Kobayalka. We're going to do a new age classical merger. And one of the songs we're going to do a theme of is Lark Ascending. So we play da 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 da, and then we go improvise. So there's like 8 notes, 8 seconds of not a sample, but we played the melody from Lark Ascending. I get a big nasty legal letter. You ripped off Lark Ascending from the lawyers who represent the Vaughan Williams estate. So we're suing you for that. But then we're also suing you for ripping off his arrangement. Now, again, we just used 8 notes and then went off for 5 minutes on our own. That was it. For his arrangement of Greensleeves. And this was classic. I go, okay, I do an improvised solo piano no rhythm improvisation on solo grand piano. His version is strict 3/4 rhythm, French horns, cannon, drums. I tell my lawyer, okay, I'll give in on the first one. I had to pay them off on that one. But for the second one, let's meet them in court. I will eat these guys for lunch. You put a musician up against a lawyer who doesn't know anything, I will get expenses. I will make money on this deal. And as soon as I pointed out just the first obvious things, they backed off and said, sorry. But it was like, there's overreach. And that was when I was on the wrong side of sampling. And it wasn't even sampled. There was another time when I was improvising, and this is where sampling gets, if it's from a record, it's obvious. When you use a couple of notes from a melody, and this is what happened to George Harrison. There were so many songs that sounded like My Sweet Lord. It was amazing that he got busted on that. And the Beatles have a song called Tomorrow Never Knows.
Off the Revolver.
Right. Yeah. Now, that was an album that was very seminal in my own life because
that Eastern Indian feel like.
Right, it was all of that. The words.
I think he froze. Right there? Yeah, I think he.
National leader in the marijuana legalization movement is not Dr. Michael Aldrich. Says, today we're going to listen to Tomorrow Never Knows, but to understand this song, to understand the Beatles, you have to get in the same mindset as the Beatles were. So to get in the same mindset, we know they were smoking marijuana. He passes out some joints. Now this is in a trailer for the English 101 class, and we toke up and he plays, and something clicked inside my head. I understood. It was the first time I ever really, listened to music after smoking, and got the enhanced perception of sound. And that was a major breakthrough. So years later, I'm improvising on an ohm zone basis, and I'm just playing notes in the mode. And at one point, I played a series of notes that sounded like one of the phrases from Tomorrow Never Knows. The da 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 da. This is just the notes of the mode. But because it was famous from that song, Harry Fox agency said, okay, you owe us $10,000. I go, for what? It's like, there was like 8 notes and I'm improvising. They just came out. I wasn't thinking of that. I had to pay up. And then I had to take the album off the market because I wasn't going to pay another $10,000 for an album that was going to sell 300 units. And so those are my two experiences of being on the other side of sampling, where there was there wasn't even an intent on my part. It was just, as a musician, when you put together notes randomly, and which is what the Beatles did. That's how that melody came for them. They put together a couple of things. So I'm sensitive to that, but I've survived that, and the album has been redone without those notes and expanded. Now the new version of Ohm Zone 432 hertz is better, but it was quite a shock. Anytime you see a lawsuit letter come and you owe us $10,000, you go, am I reading this right? It's what's wrong with this picture? I'm just trying to do a little meditation record here. It's not like you're doing Marvin Gaye, or not like it's Robin Thicke or something that's going to sell millions of copies and you're going to make millions of dollars and there's money to share. I made $1.380 on that album, and that was before I had to pay the lawsuit. So it's what it is. So again, bottom line is I'm still standing. It's like Elton John and me. And that first album, I knew it was something. I knew it was going to make a splash. I thought it was going to make a splash. It made a splash for a little bit and then went away, and then was a slow slow, gradual thing, and then started really taking off when there were stores that got set up to sell. Because originally there were very few stores that would even sell an album like Christening For Listening or Spectrum Suite. There were no sections of the New Age music. Who was the first guy to set up a New Age distributorship? Me. And I put together my album with Paul Horn's Inside album, Tony Scott, Music for Zen Meditation. I had a couple other albums. And I put together, because Storr said, well, we don't want to sell just one album. What else you got? So I called Paul and I called his label. I helped get those albums put back into print when their labels had stopped printing them, because stores wanted to have a New Age meditation music section. Paul appreciated that. Tony, I never met. So I don't know if he even knew that. But that's one of the other things that I did, just because it needed to be done. I'm an Aries from New York. No one else was doing it. Let's do it. And then when someone else said, hey, listen, why don't you focus on your music? We'll become a distributor. I said, fine, you got it. And was happy to give that up. That, by the way, that the name of that was called the Psychoacoustic Music Club. Nobody knew what psychoacoustics meant, except 8 people who knew the field. So it wasn't a great name to be a distributor for psychoacoustic, the effect of sound on body, mind, and spirit. But I was the guy that put that out there. And the first guy to get music in stores, like metaphysical stores, crystal stores, health food stores. The first album in those stores was Christening For Listening, and then Spectrum Suite. So that's, nowadays, that's one of the unknown stories, but it is part of the history of the field. And basically, it was like I had no choice. It was when you give it a choice between starving or learning how to get something done, And like many people that you talk to, I had that expression, well, I'm a musician. I'm not a business guy. I'm an artist. Artists don't get involved in business. And then it was, okay, do you want to be a starving artist? You want to starve? You want to pay the rent? I'd like to pay the rent. And given a choice like that, that was part of the shift. And then in some of the trainings I had with marketing gurus, there was a concept I had never heard about. You want to fall in love with your audience. I had never heard of that. It was almost like a me versus them. Buy this album. This is the way I want it. One other thing I should mention. We would sequence an album to go from slow, maybe build up, and then mellow out. So there would be a sequence to the songs. The first couple of songs would be mellow. I would present this to Borders when Borders was the best store in the world.
Borders Books and Music.
Borders Books and Music.
My favorite stores.
Right. And I gave them a great album, and they said, we're not going to take it. I go, why not? I go, because your first song is too slow. I go, yes, but it builds into this thing. So we don't care. People, and this is when you have to pay $3,500 a month to get the top shelf listening station. We won't give you a listening station, even if you pay for it, because your first 3 songs are too slow. People want to hear stuff. They want to hear the song. They don't want a long intro. All the New Age music basically started slow and built up. I said, so you're telling me, Mr. Borders, that if I don't resequence my album, you're telling me how to do my album. And he says, no, but if you don't do it the way that I want, I'm not going to buy it. At which point I go, okay, I guess I better change my outlook on making albums. And then I understood when people go into a listening station and they hit the first song, okay, if that's too slow, they hit the second song, it's too slow, they go on to another album. So I had to work as a partner with the stores, with the distributors. When I got that, it was a life-changing thing for me. I was no longer just an individual artist doing what I want, even though I was an indie. I had to be in the real world. And that was a major shift of attitude. And that's one of the reasons I'm still in business now, because they were right. And that's what the people wanted. One of the other things that was said to me at a big marketing seminar that $5,000 for the weekend, I go, why don't people understand such and such about my label name called Sound RX? It's a therapeutic healing sound RX. He says, it doesn't matter. If people don't get it, you can't force them to get it. you can't fight with the marketplace. I was fighting with the marketplace and did not know it. And that was another flip, an attitude adjustment. And that was when I really started understanding how to make what I do accessible, to talk less in jargon of the scientific world where I came from. Certainly not talking in the musical terms. When I would talk about polychordal harmony that I studied with Ron Carter and people in Berkeley, in any of the interviews, I go, don't talk to us about that. Don't talk about, harmonic, this and that. We talk about feelings, talk about how the music will make us feel. And don't talk about brainwaves in 1975. Now, on the internet, brainwave entrainment is a huge topic. Who was the first person to talk about brainwave entrainment out in the world? I'm one of them. And who was the first one to use music with that? Pretty much me. And who was the first one to do that on TV on 48 Hours in 1991? Me. And they cut out most of the stuff. The producer in the studio, when we were filming, said, this is amazing. I could feel the effects in my head. We got to share this with America. He got fired. The next producer cut out that stuff. I'm still on the show. I was paired with Yanni on the show back when 48 Hours was a good show.
It was on with CBS, right?
Right.
I remember seeing the actual episode on YouTube.
Right, on YouTube, right. Well, it's still there. And I remember watching it when it got delayed by the war in Iraq. And when it finally aired, and I'm waiting to see my great quotes about brainwave entrainment, and as I'm playing, and they cut all that out, you could hear me scream all the way down the block. It was like, how did they cut that out? And of course, they wouldn't give me any of the outtakes. They wouldn't give me any of the stuff that was recorded. And there was, but that was the first inkling, and that wound up being part of my album called Higher Ground. And I called the track 48 Hours in honor of them. And that album has just been reissued in its 30th anniversary, and it sounds better than ever. And when you hear the Fender Rhodes on that 48 Hours track, it's liquid. It just, it's heavenly. And I was getting into the zone with the cameras going. I just blocked that out and was just getting into the space. And they said, did you just all compose that right now? I go, yeah. And then when I added the brainwave entrainment, they said, it sounds like a different piece of music when you add the entrainment, but we don't hear the entrainment. And that's the secret. So I've been a major proponent of the use of proper brainwave entrainment. There's a whole lot of things that go beyond what we talk about in this interview. We've gone way over what I thought we would do, and I really, we've got carried away. Whether you have to break this down or whatever, this is going to surprise and enlighten a lot of people. A lot of information has been shared, and there's more to come in my book. I'll just mention one other thing. Do I have a copy handy? Yes. Also, back in the days, this album, there was going to be more of what we did on Something for Everybody Suite. This was an album that was done with a major guy that many people don't know about now, but he's the guy that basically discovered remote viewing. He was a psychic superstar, Ingo Swann. If you check that name, out of the blue, he calls me one day. He says, I'm Ingo Swann. I've just written a best-selling book. I'm negotiating to do a movie. I want to do the soundtrack so I could own the rights, and I want you to do the music. Here are the lyrics, write the music, hire the band, get the studio. I'll be back in 6 months, have it ready. Bam. And I did stuff that was still surprises me. And then everything fell apart overnight at one point, and no one would ever tell me why. But the book vanished. The book was called Starfire. It's now just been republished, but it was unavailable. It was not even in bibliographies for years. And the album was to be sold with the book and to go with the movie. So when the movie was gone and the book was gone, I was stuck with 1,000 albums that could not sell. And after giving away some to my friends and other stuff, I had to put 850 of them into the dumpster. Each box of 25 LPs when I was moving out of my home at that point. I was Charlie Horse for a week. You can't recycle albums. Nobody wanted them. And now they're going for $100 a piece if you could find one. So online, that album is going to be available very soon. And people now understand who he was. And even the disco band that we hired after the first song, they'll go, wow, what got into us? And you'll hear the first song, it's really fast. And they're a disco band. So if this is fast for a disco band, the drummer was going, I haven't sweat so much. What? And they all look at Ingo, and Ingo was just sitting there smiling. So he was doing stuff psychically, energetically. And, there's a lot of musicians who do certain levels. Ingo was a master. He was a very powerful dude, but you couldn't talk about that. In the last number of years, a lot of his research and a lot of the research that he's been involved with and other people has been declassified. So we could talk about it now. But to talk about it, 15 years ago, you could still get in trouble. So I couldn't talk about it, couldn't sell it. And I'd rather not be arrested. So given a choice between not talking and being arrested, some things have to be, and now it's okay to talk about it. I won't even talk about my interactions with the FDA in 1993, who accused me of practicing medicine without a license because my music was so good for relaxation. Are you a medical doctor? No. Well, then we think your album is a medical device, and you're in deep shit. That was a bad day.
This was during the 90s?
That was 1993.
Wow.
At a meeting with a couple other manufacturers of the sound and light goggles, the thing that would flash, that would get you into brainwave entrainment states. My music would do it without the flashing lights, would just do it automatically. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But final note, so coming from New York, I said, well, Mr. FDA guy, lawyer, I get relaxed when I meditate and look at a sunset. Why don't you bust the sun? And he looks at me, he says, he holds my album up, turns it over, says, the sun doesn't make claims on its album jacket. You make a claim. You say your music is good for relaxation. I said, yes, it is, but you're not a doctor. You can't say that. Well, that changed the next year. And I'm one of the reasons that changed, but that was a pretty dicey afternoon. And I'm just seeing my life end at that point as a musician, because if you can't talk about relaxation, what am I going to talk about? Can't talk about healing. What am I going to talk about? I can't talk about neo-impressionistic classical music, contemporary chamber music. And then that all changed. And then and that was the other thing. And then all my competitors, because what they told me is take all your albums off the market, change all the line notes, get rid of the word brainwaves with higher ground, get rid of the word relaxation. So I was now way in debt. All my competitors slapped stickers on their albums, music good for relaxation, music for relaxation, including major labels like Warner Brothers and other things, classics for relaxation. See all that stuff, all this that wasn't good for them. And you couldn't say that. They were copying my ads and my headlines and using them. And some of them actually tried suing me for using my own headlines. That was really weird. That was another kind of sampling. And I won those cases also because I had a paper trail. But it's been surprising the levels that some people have gone to. People I've known, people I don't know. And bottom line is, I'm here, we're having this conversation, and I could laugh about some of it. And some of it is going to be my book because, yeah, you laugh, but it's also not so funny. And how did I survive that? I don't know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know. But I did because I'm here. So I know I did. And that's
a lot in this business, and you're still alive to tell the tale. That's amazing.
And that's why I got to finish this book. I have so many pages of manuscript that I have to now really start putting it all together. But as I've been writing, I write one story and then, oh yeah, remember when my band, the Buffalo, opened for B.J. Thomas and they ran out without paying us. And that was the band I mentioned with Joe Ford and the others. We came in and we were hired to open the set and then be his backing band. We have 3 Black members of the band: the drummer, the saxophone player, and someone else. And BJ's manager says, "You guys are not going to back us up. We'll just go with our own guitar player." So we look at each other and go, "Okay, we're going to give Joe and Virgil, drummer and saxophone player, all the solos. Even me, yeah, we're going to give them your solos." And they, of course, played their asses off. And as we're coming off stage, the 6'6" Colonel B.J. Thomas would be honored to play with you boys. So we got back hired. And as they walk off stage, they said, keep vamping. We did not know at the time that they ran off with our part of the ticket sales also, and found that out when we finished the set. So that's a story that Joe Ford reminded me of. Remember the time we never got paid and got ripped off by? Yeah, and so there's some stuff, and some stuff we still can't talk about. And BJ's not around, and but we survived all those, and it made it difficult in some of the times. But Buffalo was a great place to learn a lot of stuff, and music was where I got to be me, and that's how I learned to be me. And then learning about business, I guess it was in there somewhere to be open to it, but had a lot of good mentors and a lot of good help, and a lot of good support over the years, because I didn't do it all myself, but now I'm involved in every aspect. I don't do bookkeeping, never did bookkeeping, suck at that, but I hire good bookkeepers, keep it all honest, but I'm involved in the graphics, the writing, the advertising, all of that, because I'm the guy that knows the stuff the best. So after paying people who didn't, and I could do better, I do better. And that's what I am busy doing all the time now.
Well, Mr. Halpern, this has been a mind-blowing interview. A lot was shared here, a lot was learned, a lot was discussed, and you're definitely welcome to come back for a part 2 anytime.
We did part 2, part 3, and part 4. It'll be part 5, and that'll be when I hear some of the sampling has evolved into, what people have done with the sample, or did they just use it and didn't do anything with it. That I don't care, that's not going to be of interest. But if they did something creative with it, it was creativity, let's talk collaboration. And then who knows, maybe then we could do something together, because my audience doesn't want it, but their audience might be interested in some of the things that I do. And that's of interest, and that's where music has new frontiers. And with the blending of genres and other things, I've always been a genre blending musician. Before there was even genres for world music or jazz world, etc. And some of the albums that I mentioned that had no place to go for years. Now there's places, and if people hear them, they go, "Oh, this sounds good," and stuff gets programmed that never got programmed before, and that's fun for me. And that's what keeps it fresh and new and ready to keep on going.
Mr. Halpern, I can't thank you enough for availing time out of your schedule for a very educational interview that you've dropped on the masses. I know once this interview is over, I'm going to go back and I'm going to listen to it and just take notes mentally and physically. So I got to thank you. I can't thank you enough.
You're welcome. But before I let you go, there's one thing I did forget because we didn't get to it in context. Here's how you could tell if music is more analytical, keeping you in a beta state of mind, a non-meditative, non-relaxation, non-healing state, or not. I christened this called the scaleless interruptus effect. If I sing a little scale pattern, watch what happens with your breathing and with your mental process. The do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Most people will sing that note, or they'll hear that note in your head, but I didn't play it. Why is that? Because we have pattern recognition. We know where the music is going. Well, guess what? That hangs you up in a certain level of being off balance in a future tense. It creates stress and tension. My graduate research was about releasing tension in music, releasing stress in music. It started before there was a whole field of stress, before the relaxation response was popularized by Dr. Herbert Benson. My music allows you to be in the moment. It doesn't go anywhere, so you don't have to project. You can't project. When I made a mistake when I'm recording in the early days, I had to do the whole thing over because I never could remember what I just played. I never knew where the next phrase was coming, but I'm in the moment. I would hear something in my head. I'd listen to the echoes and the reverberation, the overtones, and I would hear melodies in the way that I work with a sustain pedal that's central to my kind of composition. And then I'd hear the next phrase. I don't come in with everything written down, but it's that place that allows people to, now we have the word mindfulness. My music was the original mindfulness music. Buddhist chanting and certain, the Tibetan bowls and crystal bowls, that's mindful music. There's no rhythm, there's no melody. I was talking about that in my early workshops and books, and I was a proponent of all those and still am. But as a musician, I get bored just listening to a crystal bowl. I want more than that. The Rhodes, the Fender Rhodes electric piano is like Tibetan bowls, crystal bowls, but with a keyboard. So it's much more interesting for me to play and to listen to. And that was one of the secrets. I did not realize how important a concept that was until one of the scientists came back when, you know, what you talk about in the second hour of your workshop is really one of your most important discoveries. That's how I found out about it. I go, whoa, this is just like a, you know, I toss it out as a little joke, scaleless interruptus, as opposed to disco, which Herbie Mann called thumpus, non-interruptus. So it's like, okay, well, it turns out that that is one of the most profound aspects of music like mine. So if a musician understands that, they can play music that's not necessarily always derivative of mine, but they get into the state. But the hardest thing to do, man, is to play without a rhythm, to play and unlearn all the stuff that you spent a lifetime learning how to play all the scales and all the chords and which riffs go with which one. I spent many years doing that. And it's hard to turn that off. In the studio, I could turn that off. And when I do concerts, I could turn that off. And that's been my secret to keeping it new and fresh for me and doing new albums, because there's always something new that happens. A new sound and a new synthesizer. Many of the albums, I talk about this in the book, several of my albums were born because of one new program, a sound on a synthesizer that I heard in the store. I bought it that day, took it to the studio, turned it on, and half the album happened in the first hour. I mean, how does that happen? I thank the engineers that invented that sound. And one time I had a chance to meet one of them, and I thanked them because that helped do half of my album. So the sound has always been the thing. And then the connection with the muse, with the divine, the higher level, however we talk about connecting with higher frequencies, there are more and more people talking about that. And not just nowadays, there were classical composers talking about that. And they got in trouble for talking about it. They were called, you know, working with the devil. And I've been accused of working with the devil. I think I mentioned this in one of the emails. The fundamentalists, I was #1 on their satanic list of new age musicians, along with Shirley MacLaine as the demonic actress, because we promoted relaxation and meditation. I go, hey, I know who I'm working with, and it ain't those guys. You know, there's enough talk about the hip hop field and, you know, Professor Griff and other people. That's another whole discussion that is beyond what we're dealing with here. But that's not the side I play with. And it's an ongoing conversation and interaction. And that's, you know, I think at some point when we really understand where music comes from or where creativity comes from, there have been many books written about where does creativity come from? Where does music come from? And a lot of my early years were spent in me trying to understand, well, where does the music come from? This is not anything I've studied. how did this just happen in the studio? How did I suddenly learn how to play two-hand classical riffs that I've never played before in the studio after reading an autobiography of Alexander Scriabin and really getting into his spiritual perception? I go into some of that in the book. So there's a lot of mysteries, and it's magical, and that's why music and magic have some of the same linguistic roots. The ancients knew this, and the ancient musicians knew this, and that's the lineage that I tap into. And we're keeping it lineage holder and going on with it. At my age now, I'm allowed to say it. When I was starting out, I couldn't talk about being a lineage holder, but I knew from my own experience and what I was told from others who saw that in me, that this is part of who I was and what my mission was before I knew all what it was. And then I grew into it. And I go, that's what they were talking about. And then when I was in Egypt and inside the pyramid, a lot of things opened up for me, that flashbacks of other lifetimes, major opportunities that again came for me through my music and through my teachings. And then that would then open up other levels of where the music will go in the future. Thank you for allowing me to get that in there.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I just wanted to ask you another question. It just popped up like just a second ago.
Good.
What made you keep going, like in light of the low record sales initially that your records were making when you first started out and doing new age music?
Great question. I've asked myself that several times also. Number one, I didn't know any better. Number two, I looked at my options. I did teach before I did my recording. I was a public school music specialist for 2 years in Palo Alto, and that department that I was part of got phased out. I didn't work well in offices. I knew I couldn't do a 9 to 5. The only time I ever showed up on time for jobs was the 2 years I was working as a teacher, and they didn't hire me for 6 months, 3 months when I was trying to get the job. We don't think you'll be able to show up on time. You have to be in the teacher's lounge at 8:30. You're a musician. You'll never do it. I never missed a day. Got there at 1 minute of 9 one time, but I was always in the class by 9 o'clock. And it was just like, I knew inside that this is what I was supposed to do. And what kept me going without the sales though, is those concerts. And when people started hearing me at the conferences, the mind, body, spirit conferences, and then there was things called the new, what was the first one? The Whole Life Expo. And then the New Life Expo in New York, and the Whole Life Expo in LA, and the Conscious Life Expo. I was the first musician to be a keynote speaker. So I would do speeches, I'd do workshops, and then other people would invite me, and I would make money at those gigs, because at the end of the class, at the end of the program, so I would sell. I'd make my expenses and then more. But the other big way that kept me going, and I didn't mention it before, but I really should, so thank you for the opportunity. I met John Bradshaw met me. John Bradshaw, who introduced the concept of the inner child and family dynamics, and did a lot of work with addiction and alcoholism. When I met him, I was on book tour with my book, Sound Health, which was published by Harpern Row. I was already writing it. They called me and says, hey, we want to do a book on music and healing. Everyone says we're going to talk to you. Well, I'm already writing the book. Well, fine. We'll publish it. Didn't have an agent. Big mistake. Anyway, Bradshaw knew my music from earlier, from Spectrum Suite, from Starborn Suite, from Zodiac Suite. And when I met him, and he said, your music has helped me work my program of sobriety, helped me stay sober. So it was a one-off. Met him in Houston. I'm on book tour. A couple of years later, I get a call from his manager. John wants you to open for him at a concert. No, it's my only weekend off that whole summer, 1988. You don't understand. The concert is at Red Rocks outside of Denver. The huge, wonderful thing. I said, it's my only weekend. And I don't know who John Bradshaw is. Really, I seen them on TV once, and they call back. And the third time, there's kind of a spiritual law. If you get 3 times, they knock 3 times. So I said, okay, I'll do it. It was no rehearsal. He called me on stage. We played together like we've been playing together for years. And we look all at each other and go, we got to go on tour. He says, why don't you be my musician in residence? Come on tour with me. And I got to play in cities all around and sold so many albums. That kept me in business for 3 years. And that was when I got out of the main record label contract, was basically going back into bankruptcy, Bradshaw's, sales, and that visibility. And those people then would order albums after the gig also. And that kept me going for years. And then it was that point, I go, okay, this is now people who had never heard of meditation, who were not New Ages, was an audience I had no connection with at all. People who were adult children of alcoholics, the whole addiction world. I didn't know that I knew anyone who was addicted, except a drummer back in Buffalo who hocked my amplifier to get his drums out for a gig and then hocked his drums again. That was my first lesson on addiction, what people will do. And I had waited a year to buy that Fender, twin reverb. I go, well, if that's what addiction can do, I don't want to go near any of that. And it was like, again, I really don't have anything I really want to do. So in California, how I also survived was the classic back in the day when you could refinance your house. So I would refinance my mortgage, like a lot of my friends. And then a couple of years later, I'd refinance it again. And that's how I survived a lot of the lean years until, tax-wise, I was doing the alternative minimum tax, and the IRS basically said, you're so tiny, you're not on our radar, because I was just above the poverty level, but was paying the bills, but not making a profit. Those early years, one other thing, when I had hired my first professional business company to run my company back in 1978, he says, oh, you're doing so great. We had sales of $1 million that year, the year before I signed the major label deal. I said, well, if I'm doing so great, how come I have no money in my bank account? And he says, well, you have $250,000 in inventory on the shelf. You have $250,000 of accounts receivable. If you got all that money, you'd have money. I never got that money. So I was back to zero again. And, but I asked that question. If I'm doing so well, how come I don't have any money? Like a simple person thinking, okay, if you're doing well, you should have money to, buy a car or do something that you're not always just barely getting by. And something Ron Carter said to us in that early class in Buffalo, he said, all this crap about starving artists, man, I play better blues if I know where my rent is coming from, if I got my rent covered. And I learned that in 1968, but I forgot it. And I had to keep learning it again. But he knew it back then. It's like, you don't have to be a starving artist to play the blues. You don't have to be a starving artist to do other things, but there's an aspect of integrity. And again, it was like that internal soul aspect when in my heart of hearts, who I was and what I was here to be doing, it's a calling. And the calling didn't care. I didn't get into it to make money. I didn't get into the field to make, to be famous. I didn't have my name on the first album. I mean, it wasn't about me, it was about the music. And then you find out that in the real world, you have to have a name on your album because a person did the music. You didn't have a computer or AI do the music. And you may know that AI is now composing new age music and other kinds of music. Have you heard about that?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's another whole thing that is probably not good. I know I've heard some crap on some of these stations. I said, if that's a musician, that's an example of a really crappy musician. And then when I read in Billboard about the AI being composing music. I said, oh, that's what I've been hearing. It's like
another level of automation.
yeah, it's like that's a danger. So I don't know, are we going to get replaced? Well, I don't think people like me are ever going to be totally replaced, but we're already seeing it. We're getting less airplay because they're playing AI that they don't have to pay for. So that's another big thing. But having fought with Napster, having fought with YouTube for putting my music up for free, now YouTube is the best way to get my music out to the world. Even before just looking around online, I put something on my website, on my YouTube channel, people see it, and then maybe they'll listen to it on Spotify or Pandora or somewhere else, or they'll listen to Pandora and find some of my music. And the bottom line is, there's almost like a spiritual universal principle. You put stuff out, and it doesn't have to come back on a one-to-one relationship. You put it out to the universe, you give, and it comes back in another way. The difference now is things are coming back, energy is coming back, as opposed to just putting it out, and barely scraping by. And I have so many years of just scraping by, and given a choice between scraping and being comfortable, as Ron Carter said, it's much better to be comfortable. So it's like, it's an honor for me, and it's a level of gratitude and also humility, because this is very recent. If we were having this conversation 2 years ago, it would have been a very different conversation. That's how quickly the world has changed. And I was one of the people, I think about some of the interviews I had where they think, well, how do you feel about, Napster, or how do you feel about this and that, and CDs going away? I said, I'm a CD guy. I don't feel good about it. And as I watch my monthly go down, 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 and basically I'm living at break even, I don't feel that good about it, quite frankly. And now I wish I could find that reporter to say, I got a different answer now, and it's economy of scale. And once again, the marketplace is telling you, people vote with what they listen to. And people are saying, hey, Alexa, my biggest source of royalties now is Amazon. It's Alexa. I don't have Alexa, so I don't tell Alexa. I play my own CDs, because I've always programmed my own environment and sound. But a lot of people are just doing that and say, hey, Alexa, play Halpern. And when you have 1,000 people doing it, big deal. When you have a couple million, that sets up a whole different dynamic energetically in terms of morphic resonance and other spiritual concepts. And now, even though the royalty is still very small, there's still, it's no longer 32 cents a month. Maybe Google is still $5.52 a month, but they're one of my smallest accounts. Tidal, very, very tiny. But Pandora, Spotify, the major ones, I remember basically when my bookkeeper says, you need to look at your, royalty, because I stopped looking for a couple of years because it was so depressing. I will admit that. And it was like, okay, we still maximize out all the credit cards. We max out the credit line. She called me one day, have you looked at your credit line? I said, no, it's too embarrassing. Well, look, it's paid off. I go, when did that happen? She says, you need to pay more attention to the business side. And that was it. And it happened that quickly that I basically fell off my chair. And it was like, wow. And then it was, God bless, thank you, angels, thank you. However this is happening, thank everyone who's making this happen, because the music has been out there and it wasn't getting the response, but now it's found its audience. And some people will just look for new age music, but a lot of people search under my name. So that's where, when I see people doing variations, copying my name, I know they're trying to get my hits to their website, but at least enough of them are still finding me on the streaming services and whatever, that it's working. And when they find my music, they'll find music that really works to reduce their stress, to help them heal, to help them feel better, just to relax, to get to sleep at night. One of the early feedback I got that I was never even concerned about. I'll just shut up after this. So I listened to your Christening for Listening. I love it. It helps me get to sleep at night. It's the only thing that helped me get to sleep at night. I had never used it to go to sleep. I had no idea people would use it for that. It's used for massage, for lovemaking, for this and that, not to go to sleep. It's one of my biggest audience sections, because my music, because you don't have to mentally project where the music is going, you could relax into the sound. And the sound of my Rhodes piano, the sound of my synthesizer is such a warm cloud of sound. We call it like sonic incense. It's what I go to sleep with every night. And I tested it for myself, but I had no idea other people were doing this. And I found out, yeah, we listen to it at night all the time. And it even helps my husband stop snoring. So it's things that I never would have imagined. And okay, that was not the intent, but if that's how it is being used, then great, because the music was designed to be used. And now that it's used in all the different aspects, it's just such an honor. And every day I wake up in gratitude. And and right now we didn't have a fire this year. We didn't have tornadoes. We didn't have hurricanes. So I don't have COVID. And basically, as a musician and a writer, I'm stuck in my own office. So I don't get out a whole lot. Most of my interactions are now with Zoom. And, we hope that that's going to be over. But relaxation and healing, enhancing one's immune system is one of the other things. While you wait for your vaccine or whatever, enhance your own immune system. One of the best ways to enhance your immune system is by getting into a relaxed state. That was one of the first things I learned in 1970, because a doctor told me, you got some stress-related diseases, son. If you don't know how to handle your stress, you're going to have some big problems later on. I go, well, I don't have any money to pay doctors. If I can handle stress on my own and I can play my own music and it helps me reduce my stress, well, hot damn, I'm going to do that. And then, so I was listening to my own little reel-to-reel tapes before I made my first album. And that's part of how I stayed alive. So I am a card-carrying proof of the healing power of music. And the fact that other people are discovering this now, that's been the mission from day one. And there's more music coming. So the latest album I have, The Ocean of Bliss, I'm working on now Ocean of Bliss version, volume 2. And you just, from the first notes, your body goes, ah. And I hadn't listened to it in about 6 months until 3 nights ago. I had forgotten how good it was. I go, wow. So I just overdubbed and I'm working on the new album. And to do that, the other thing is I have to get myself into the state. The other thing about recording is you can't fake it. You can't just play the notes. You have to be in the state where the music is. So it forces me as a musician in the studio to get into that deeply meditative state. And as I mentioned early on, so I would pay the engineers to just take 20 minutes. Let me just be in this totally silent, anechoic chamber where the sound pressure is like being inside the Great Pyramid or an audiology lab. The other place where I had a great meditative experience was when I got my hearing tested. And that was when the guy comes out and says, if you have any hearing problems, you hear off our chart. We can't measure you. You're the first guy that hears beyond what we can measure. And when I went back 6 years later after an accident, that doctor remembered me. Oh, the guy that hears off the chart. So physically, I hear things that other people don't. And then psychically, I hear things that other people don't. It's not always a blessing.
Clairaudience? There's a name for that, clairaudience.
Yeah, clairaudience is part of it, indeed. And how ideas come to me. But back in Santa Cruz, I actually was invited to take a class that was on a psychic development class on clairvoyance. And I was not that good about that, but my clairaudience started getting better. And they said, well, your modality is not automatic writing. It's not this, you're not going to see colors, but you'll hear. And that was when it started happening more. And a couple other things came into my life that really confirmed that was happening to me, that it wasn't just something I read about, was for something else and only them. And that really helped me understand that I might be eccentric, but I wasn't necessarily weird. I wasn't the only one. There was a while where people would just call me weird because I would hear a ticking clock across the room, and other people said, "There's no clock over there." It was a guy's watch across the room in New York. And they gave me some very funny looks. And I was asked to leave. I've confronted people about the noise of their refrigerators at gatherings, and been asked to leave certain places. I pissed off one of my professors in grad school when his grandfather clock was driving me crazy from that tick, tock, tick. So when he left the room to go to the bathroom, I grabbed the pendulum and it stopped making the noise. I could take a deep breath. I felt so much better. He came back in the room and freaked out. I was kicked out. I was almost thrown out of grad school. How dare you touch my grandfather clock? So people have different, levels of sensibility. I've always been highly sensitive to noises. But now I know it's not just sensitivity, but I actually physically hear stuff that people don't hear, which is often a problem. If I'm visiting someone who has noisy neighbors, or like I have one noisy neighbor who has the loudest hot tub around, and so I'm working on dealing with them for the last year, and they refuse. I've offered to buy them a quieter one. I'll pay for it. Nope. So that's, so it's a mixed blessing. But in the studio where I can control the environment, it's a blessing. And given a choice, I would not have this career if I didn't have the other stuff. So it comes with the territory, and it's as far as I understand, it's what I signed up for, and going to continue doing it as long as I can.
Mr. Halpern, thank you so much. Any closing words?
I think we've covered it all. We've had a couple of different closing words.
Yeah.
I want to just really acknowledge you, because this is the longest Zoom interview I've ever done. And you set a vibe, you set a context. It's like what I was talking about in the studio as a producer, as a musician. There's something you do that just your vibe and your context that allowed this to happen. Because I was expecting a half hour, we're going to hit it, we'll be done. Yeah. I have another meeting. Luckily, I didn't schedule anything after us. And, there we are, because this, I had no idea we were doing it, but I was supposed to be somewhere an hour ago. And I just, I said, I will call to confirm if I'm going to be there. So I didn't confirm. They know I wasn't going to be there. So I really want to acknowledge you for putting this out there. And I think we'll get a bunch of people who will be, contacting you. They're welcome to contact me through my website. I don't myself tweet. It goes through my associate. I don't do a lot of stuff on Facebook, but if they tweet, that'll get forwarded to me, and then you can get my email. And if you want to dialogue, email is my best way of communicating, pretty much, rather than tweeting or and with everything that's going on with Facebook. A lot of things that I was going to say on Facebook, but now that we know about the surveillance and everything else, I'm not putting that stuff on Facebook, and just trying to keep a less conspiratorial aspect out there. But I am open to talk to musicians or anyone who has questions. Anyone who's watching this and has some questions, or want some other guidance as a musician, or you have things you want me to listen to, you can send me hightail files, you can send things, and I'll respond. So, I am open to that. And it's part of my role as a teacher and educator, which is another part of my gig, that I've always been a teacher and an educator. And when I was doing workshops, it was that. And part of what we do in these podcasts is we put out information. So it's not just about me, it's information you could use and that can help you live your life better, to stay in tune better, to feel better, and that's what it's all about, you know. And now that we understand that the relationship between immune system and relaxation and reducing stress and feeling good, it's more important than ever. And that's why I'm putting this stuff out there.
With that being said, Mr. Halpern, once again, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show and educating and edutaining, as I'd like to say.
Right.
The listeners / viewers. And as always, you're welcome to come back anytime. Mi casa, su casa.
Great. And Earl, the next time we do it, you got to call me Steven, not Mr. Halpern.
Okay.
I meant to catch that early on.
Steven.
All right, brother.
Cool. All right, then. So you take it easy, and I'll talk to you next time.
Right. Until then, namaste.
I think it's still recording. Hold on 1 second.